Thanks everyone, for jumping on board. I'm Josh Kaplan, I'm one of the founding partners at Vicente Cedarburg. We have a jam-packed webinar for you all today about, not just cannabis on the ballot this November, but also psychedelics. And, it's, yeah, I'm excited for it. A quick overview is we're going to go through, a number, what is on the ballot? What do these actually look like, with my fantastic colleagues here, and then we'll have some time for questions at that, and sort of talk a little bit about next steps. So with that, here's our presenters. You got myself, who's the talking head, who's greeting you all, and then you also have Andrew, who's by far one of the smartest cannabis policy dorks around. We have Sally, who's fantastic, runs our Florida office, our Southern contingent, and Yolanda, who is deep in Oregon, and and a bunch of other things, and is also super excited to have her on as well. So with that, let's get started. And so if you have just a little quick reminder, if you have questions, use the question and answer function. We'll try and get to them at the end. And from there, Andrew, you want to sort of kick it off with this overview map?
Absolutely, Josh. Thank you so much. Let's talk about what we've got on the ballot for November, and I want to highlight not only what we have on the ballot, but what didn't make the ballot, but we may see in the future. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on as we dive into some of the details. Not just about cannabis ballot initiatives for this November, but also the complications that have been passed over the last number of years, which make ballot access more difficult. So we're going to see adult use ballot initiatives in North Dakota, South Dakota, Missouri, Arkansas, and Maryland. And then, of course, psychedelics in Colorado, and then local initiatives out in Oregon. That being said, we could have had this also in Ohio, Florida, Oklahoma. Oklahoma actually is going to be likely in the spring, and Ohio in sometime later in 2023, hopefully. Florida likely 2024. And then, of course, we had the opportunity, but they were not able to gather significant enough signatures in Idaho, Wyoming, and Nebraska. So we are adding new cannabis states, every single year. I think 5 is the most adult use states on the ballot since 2020, or maybe it's 2016. So we're really kind of pushing forward, continuing to see cannabis reform across the country. And this year it's going to be a lot of the Midwest. So hopefully we'll get a full sweep. And we'll add cannabis access to many millions more Americans throughout the heartland.
Awesome, thank you, Andrew, for the overview. Yes, super fascinating with so many states, so many states on the ballot, and then also so many that didn't qualify who tried as well.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on in the talk about really the complications that we've seen that change not only what states are on the ballot, but also the type of language that we see once they get there.
Yeah, super fascinating. All right, I'm going to pass the mic over to you, Sally, to give us a lowdown on what's happening in Missouri.
Hey guys, Sally Peoples talking to you from Florida. I'm very excited to see some more southeastern states take the steps towards ending cannabis prohibition. I'm going to start here talking about Missouri. Right now, they just have a medical program. And next slide, please. And a group called Legal Missouri 2022 got enough signatures and have placed Amendment 3 on this upcoming ballot. It will legalize the possession and purchase and commercial production and sales of marijuana for those 21 and older. It will also allow for home cultivation, which is something we don't always see with adult use initiatives, but that's exciting for those of you interested in cultivating at home for personal use. It includes a potential record expungement clause for those convicted of nonviolent marijuana related offenses, and it will include a 6% tax. Next slide, please. So what types of licenses will we have for adult use in Missouri? We're going to have 2 license types: comprehensive facilities and the marijuana microbusiness facilities. The marijuana microbusiness facilities are different from the comprehensive facilities in that they are the social equity type licenses. So you will have to comply with certain criteria to qualify for those licenses. And they are the smaller operational licenses. They are limited to 250 plants. Another key thing to understand is that the comprehensive facilities and the microbusiness facilities have no crossover. They have completely 2 separate supply chains, separate application processes, and there's going to be no commingling between the products or the operations. So if you're a microbusiness cultivation facility, you're only going to be able to sell those products to a microbusiness dispensary. And the same thing with the comprehensive facilities. And for ownership, you can't hold both license types. You have to just stick with one lane. Next slide, please. And so how will you get these licenses? So for the comprehensive facilities, for the first 1.5 years after this amendment if it passes and it goes into effect, for the first 1.5 years, the existing medical licensees will be able to convert their licenses to comprehensive facilities. And that will happen pretty fast. As soon as the initiative becomes effective, you can, the existing medical facilities can request to make that conversion, and they'll have 60 days to either approve or deny you. After that initial first 1.5 years, new licensees may be chosen through a lottery process, but that won't be until after 1.5 years. Switching gears over to the microbusiness facilities, there are going to be about 144 microbusiness facilities issued all through a lottery system through over 3 rounds that will play out over time. Next slide, please. Arkansas. So very, very excited about Arkansas, mainly because I keep tabs on the Southeast. And if Arkansas passes, this will be the first and only adult use market in the Southeast. And what will issue number 4 do? It will permit adults 21 and over to possess and purchase up to 1 ounce of cannabis flower. And who will be in charge of all this? The Alcoholic Beverage Control Division, the ABC, is going to be regulating and overseeing the program, including the licenses of these businesses. If you're excited to be a part of the Arkansas program for adult use, great, but I would wait for a second because localities are going to be able to have the ability to ban or limit these businesses within its jurisdiction. So we'll have to wait and see who decides they're in or out. And issue 4 will also establish a 10% supplemental cannabis sales tax. Next slide, please. Okay, licenses. They are calling their adult use licenses commercial establishments, and there'll be 3 types: Tier 1 and Tier 2 cultivations and dispensary licenses. The difference between the Tier 1 and the Tier 2 cultivation licenses is that Tier 2 is capped at 250 plants, so they're the smaller of the 2. So the way this will play out, by March 7th, 2023, so in the next 5 months or so, the ABC is going to give existing medical cultivation operators 1 Tier 1 cultivation license each. And each medical marijuana dispensary licensee will get 2 dispensary licenses each. So just like we saw in Missouri, in Arkansas, the existing medical marijuana licensees will get that first bite out of the apple. Then by July 5th, 2023, the ABC will then issue an additional 40 dispensary licenses via lottery to new applicants. So those of you out there interested, who don't already have a license in Arkansas, that's when you would be able to apply to get one of these dispensary licenses via a lottery system. And then by November 8th, the ABC will issue 12 Tier 2 cultivation licenses to new applicants via lottery.
Awesome. So guys, really excited to be talking to you about Maryland, my home state. It's had a medical market for several years now, and there's been really, really strong support to pass legalization measures, but it's never actually happened. So Maryland has taken a bit of an interesting approach to get this kind of over the finish line. So what they've done is actually referred a constitutional amendment to the people of Maryland. And the language that they're going to see on the ballot this November is on the slide right now. If this passes, the Constitution for the state of Maryland will be updated to authorize all individuals at least 21 years of age to possess cannabis. Next slide, Josh. As part of this, you might be wondering, what are the business opportunities going to be? What is the licensing structure going to look like? And these are all really good questions that we do not currently have the answer to. What Maryland has done is, along with the constitutional amendment, last legislative session, they passed HB 837, which will go into effect if the constitutional amendment passes. This bill does a lot of really great things, but one thing it does not do is outline the regulatory and licensing structure for the new adult market. So you will have, legal possession up to 1.5 ounces. It's going to remove criminal penalties for 2.5 ounces. It's going to permit home cultivation. It's going to automatically expunge convictions that would now be legal under HB 1, which is the constitutional amendment. And it would also permit petitions for expungement for those with certain convictions 3 years after their sentence. So it does do a lot of really good things, but there are quite a number of things that are still outstanding. One thing that we do know is that the regulatory agencies are going to merge. So currently the medical cannabis program is under the Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission. That's going to be merging with the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission. It's not a complete takeover from either department. They're just going to be merging. Some of the departments are going to be, or the subsections are going to be consolidating. Some are going to be kept separate. Enforcement will likely be kept separate between the different substances, but they're going to be working together to hopefully improve efficiencies. We'll see how that goes. In terms of the licensing itself and what the business opportunities are going to be in this new market, a lot of that is to be determined. There have been legislative working groups that have already been meeting in anticipation of this passing, but are they going to stay with a merit system like they've had for previous medical applications? We don't know. Are they going to move to a lottery like so many states have been moving towards? So a lot of this is, assuming it passes, is going to be hashed out in the next legislative session. So it's going to be really important to pay close attention to what's going on in the legislature and, speak with your representatives. Josh, next slide. In terms of whether this is likely to pass, it's, you never want to say never, but we are looking very good. Almost all of the recent polling is showing majority support across all demographics: Democrats, Independents, Republicans, all age ranges. These were the two that I cited here from Goucher College and the Washington Post, UMD poll, very well-known institutions in the state. There was another poll that was released just today from the Baltimore Sun and University of Baltimore, which shows 63% of likely voters plan on voting yes. So it is highly likely that we will see this constitutional amendment pass, and then we're just going to have to pay attention to see what the licensing opportunities are down the line.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. Really looking forward to what may roll out in the state of Maryland. So next, we're going to jump to North Dakota, the north of the two Dakotas. So initiated statutory measure 2 is on the ballot in 2022. So as you may remember, you might think there's a little bit of deja vu. Didn't South Dakota pass didn't North Dakota have a ballot initiative in the past? And yes, they did in 2018. They did vote on adult use legalization, but they did not pass it. It was really a bare bones initiative. It didn't really have any regulatory structure for licenses, and it raised less than $100,000 and only got 40% of the vote. Hopefully this year will be different. It's a lot more well-funded of an initiative. It's backed by some national advocacy groups, New Approach and Marijuana Policy Project, with New Approach taking the lead for North Dakota. And it's predominantly funded by both those in-kind donations and from those major advocacy groups and existing medical licensees, predominantly the two different manufacturers, or what they call their producer processors, and then one of the larger retailers. North Dakota only will permit 7 manufacturers and 18 dispensaries across the entire state. Now, that is an increase from the just 2 manufacturers and 8 dispensaries that exist in their very limited medical program, but it's not huge. That's about 1 adult use retail store for every 3,600 cannabis consumers, which is not the best when it comes to access, kind of equivalent to, a little better than we say like Utah's medical cannabis program, but not as good as Missouri's or something like that. And so, we'll see what happens as far as that expansion. Some of the dispensaries are limited from how, whether or not you can commonly own 2 in the same city. But given the fact that North Dakota doesn't have that many large cities or even large towns, with 18 dispensaries, you'll probably have one within, an hour or so from where you're at, hopefully less. And you can possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis flower, 4 grams of concentrates, 500 milligrams of infused products, and you can cultivate up to 3 plants. So North Dakota, there's not really any polling on, or at least it's pretty limited. But hopefully we'll see this one pass, as we had seen South Dakota, and I'll jump down to the next slide, pass in 2020. And that, again, begs the question, wait, aren't we having Dakota deja vu here? Like, didn't South Dakota already legalize cannabis? And the reality is they did, but you can't always get what you want, particularly when you're dealing with South Dakota Governor Noem. So South Dakota, they approved Amendment A by 54% in 2020. They did this alongside a medical cannabis measure passed in the same year. They were the first to pass both medical and adult use at the same time, but Governor Noem and the state Supreme Court worked to invalidate the measure on single subject grounds. And I'll talk more about the importance of single subject rules, signature gathering requirements, and others a little bit after this. So South Dakota voters will have the opportunity to reaffirm their support for Measure 27, predominantly being funded, with really in-kind donations in the work for Marijuana Policy Project. And they've had one of their head staffers on the ground there for quite a while, helping to push not just medical cannabis and adult use in 2020, but now the continual campaign to get adult use passed. And Governor Noem has indicated that if it passes this year, she'll allow it, but who knows? I don't know. She clearly wasn't always truthful in her desires to allow the voters to get what they wanted back 2 years ago. It's just 3 pages and does not include any substantive business licensing provisions. And that's in large part because of how the Supreme Court invalidated the initiative back 2 years ago. It does allow for the possession of up to 1 ounce of cannabis, no more than 8 grams of concentrate in that 1 ounce, and 3 plants if there are no stores in the jurisdiction. So there's little things in the measure which kind of hint, hey, we should have stores. But I think that's a kicker because South Dakota, they don't necessarily want cannabis being grown at home everywhere. So this puts the pressure on them to allow for stores, not only through the legislature, which will have to be implemented if it does pass this year, but then also at the local level as well. Okay, next slide, please. Great. So as I have indicated every time I've talked, it's important to understand these initiative processes. So how the path of the ballot influences the future market opportunities. And let's go to the next slide. I'll dive in a lot more here because ballot initiatives are complicated. It's one thing to read the actual language and be like, oh, these are kind of weird to understand. But if you're good at reading laws, you can figure out most of what they would do. Now, the larger and more difficult thing is to ask yourself, wait, why was it written this way? Why are some ballot initiatives so scant, have so little information in them, and others are very detailed and robust? Why are some ballot initiatives, constitutional and others are statutory, whether they amend the Constitution themselves or, they are just passing and changing the laws? And really importantly from there, what passes, does this actually get implemented? So let's first talk a little bit about, the first way in which we separate these two. So legislatively referred versus petition initiative ballot measures. So most of the time when you think about ballot measures, you're probably thinking about the latter, petition-initiated ballot measures. So these are ones in which people go around with clipboards and they collect signatures, and you get enough signatures, and you get that on the ballot, right? So you need so many signatures throughout the state, or so many signatures in different areas. And once you get through that threshold, you get your ballot title approved, you get your language approved, usually by the Attorney General. There's a bunch of different processes that have to occur. Has to occur in a tight timeline so we can get on ballot in time. And then all the signatures have to be verified to be printed for this November. So in some states, they've made that harder through signature collection requirements in different places. So you guys may or may not know Mississippi, which passed back in 2020, and the ballot, voters said, yes, we want legal medical cannabis. And then the Supreme Court said, hey, actually, we don't want legal medical cannabis because of an arcane quirk within our laws. Basically said, hey, you got to collect ballot signatures associated with the 5 different congressional districts, except we only have 4 congressional districts. So their entire ballot collection, signature, and ballot petition process in Mississippi is kerplunk. It's gone. In some places like Oklahoma, which collected enough signatures to get on the ballot for this year, and then the state decided to instead use a third party for that signature verification, took forever, and they just ran out the clock and then just didn't get it on the ballot. So ballot signature collection is complicated. It's a little bit easier when you have legislatively referred ballot measures. So Maryland this year is a legislatively referred ballot measure. That happens in many states which do not have direct citizen petition initiated ballot measure processes. So pretty much every state, the legislature can, rather than do their job and just pass legalization, can kick the can down the road by referring it to voters. This is what is happening in Maryland. This is what happened in New Jersey in the past. They have the political support to do it, but they don't have the political, courage. And so they decide to kick it to voters. And when that happens, the legislature is really in control. They're going to be the ones that are going to write the laws that get implemented. And as we're seeing in Maryland, this is the exact same thing that happened in New Jersey. They passed the law and they don't yet know how they're going to actually legalize and regulate the commercial industry. They just know they want to allow for expungement, possession, and social equity. And so that comes first. And then really we'll probably see this law hopefully get detailed in 2023 and then implemented sometime in 2024 and after. Next, let's talk about statutory versus constitutional ballot measures. So it's got a split actually this year. Arkansas, Missouri, Maryland, these are all statutory. North Dakota, South Dakota, and Colorado are all constitutional ballot measures. This really depends upon what can happen in the states. Some states don't allow for constitutional ballot measures. Other states, you can only do it through the Constitution, although that's a little bit fewer. And typically when you pass them through the Constitution, it is harder to repeal because it would have to be changed through a constitutional measure. Now, of course, the state Supreme Court can always strip it out, basically say, it either didn't pass or, wasn't valid. But this provides a little bit more protection there. Furthermore, these structures, actually, I just realized I flipped that. Arkansas, Missouri, and Maryland are constitutional. North and South Dakota and Colorado are statutory. I switched them in the thing. I was just looking at that. Yeah. Maryland is a legislatively referred constitutional measure. So apologies, flip those around my head for a second. So let's talk about what are some of these issues there that shift this. So single subject rules, tight timelines, as I was mentioning, geographic signature collection requirements. These not only make the initiatives more expensive, they also change the stakeholders, the ballot language, and the resulting market. So let's talk first about single subject rules. So this is one of these things that have actually kept Florida off the ballot for many years. The state Supreme Court there takes a very strict view, not only on their single subject, but their ballot initiative summaries, which pretty much then requires they be single subject. This is basically being passed really in states across the country. And it is important for me to just take a step back and be honest for a second. This is a concerted measure across the entire country by predominantly Republicans and state and conservative state Supreme Courts to make direct ballot access and direct democracy more difficult. They've recognized that they do not want citizens to have a say directly in how the laws get passed. This goes beyond cannabis into things like minimum wage laws, abortion access, and all of this. And cannabis has been swept up in this sea of really Republican and conservative states making this more difficult. So the single subject rule that the state Supreme Court in South Dakota used to invalidate that measure back in 2020 only occurred because the state legislature passed a single subject rule. I think it was a year or two prior. These are new laws that are being passed because these states suddenly realized that direct democracy might allow for more progressive or not Republican and conservative ideals to pass in their state. They don't want that. They've also doing the similar sort of thing with geographic signature collection requirements. So typically, or originally in many states, you just need to collect X number of signatures and you get on the ballot. But they've realized that you can do that just by going to the cities. And we all know that, people in the cities just honestly don't represent the full state. So, which is crazy. Obviously they do. But these states have recognized that, oh, no, we need to make sure to get, rural people to also have signature collection requirements because they may have different opinions, which more align to those conservative state legislators. And so we now have to collect signatures really across the state. This increases the cost of signature collection. Now, what happens when you increase the cost? Your timelines get shorter. So again, your signature collection gets more costly, and you can't put as much detail in the law. Well, typically what happens is that the only way to pass then is to gather a lot of money. And to do that, we oftentimes have to rely on the existing operators. And we can't go into too much detail. And so the laws the structure has to be short. And so what happens from then is that a lot of these laws that are being written by the existing operators, and they typically favor those existing operators because that's how you fund these initiatives. So this is changing not only how you get to the ballot, but once you get to the ballot, why these laws are written the way they are. And from here on forward, ballot initiatives, when they pass through a citizen-initiated petition, are likely going to follow a similar structure as we're seeing in North Dakota, in Missouri, in Arkansas, and as we've seen in Arizona in the past. Thanks, Josh.
Thank you, Andrew. Super, super informative. Let's see. All right. Well, thanks, Sally and Yolanda and Andrew so far. Now, at least I've been waiting for it. I know, many of you have been waiting for it, is psychedelics on the ballot. And yet so I'll sort of jump in with, Prop 122. This measure's on the ballot here in Colorado. I think, Andrew sort of like set the stage pretty well in terms of, hey, this is a statutory measure. It's non-constitutional, which means that it can be changed by the state legislature. And it also, is sort of subject to the same limitations, both like the single subject requirement, but the prohibition on imposing taxes in it. I mean, so, a lot of the drafting, as we will unpack a little bit, is really sort of based off of these, constitutional and just sort of like petition-based restrictions. So what does Prop 122 do? So Prop 122 creates access to natural psychedelic assisted therapy in Colorado through sort of two models. One, it creates a state regulated model where there's state licensed facilitators who will be able to supervise natural psychedelic assisted therapy experiences. Most of these will take place in state licensed healing centers, but there is provisions for this, for these, natural psychedelic assisted sessions to also take place at other healthcare facilities or private residences, upon rules to be created. a big piece of this, like a lot of the details of like, hey, what is this actually going to look like is going to be created through the implementation process. There's a 15-person advisory board that needs to be created. And a lot of the regulations you need to be put forward by DORA. A couple like key pieces of the a couple key pieces to watch out for, in this regulatory model with DORA. One is that there is a mandate for DORA to create an equitable access and equitable ownership program. So sort of like three pieces to think about there is, one is how do we create equitable access to otherwise like very expensive just very expensive therapy, because you're literally paying a therapist to be with someone for 5 hours, for 10 hours. So how do we create access there? There's a mandate that DORA helps with that. And then there's also a mandate to figure out how do we create equity amongst ownership of these licenses, and also also ownership of sort of like not even ownership, but the ability to obtain a facilitator license. So a lot of these details will be fleshed out in the implementation process. There's also a built-in mechanism to help fund this equity program. Another super interesting thing around the regulatory process is there is some sort of really forward-thinking limitations on the corporatization of psychedelics, and this is comes in a couple of different flavors, but one is that the state's required to create a screen around environmental, social, and governance practices that and rate each potential applicant on their business practices, and only let in businesses that that receive a certain score. So for example, the state might say, hey, if you're net zero, we'll give you 20 points, or if you're or if you have a program that gives back to indigenous communities, we'll give you 50 points. And what this screen actually looks like, and sort of like the strength of the screen, is sort of like to be determined by DORA and this sort of like community implementation process. But I think that is something as folks should pay attention to, because it really is sort of a first first in the country sort of piece. And then there's also limitations on sort of the number of businesses any individual can have an interest in. The idea of like, hey, we want these to be small, not small, but we want these to be like community-based healing centers, that really sort of like focus on providing healing from a community perspective. The second big piece of Prop 122 is that it also decriminalizes personal use. And this provision has had us criticized by both the people in the grassroots provision, in the grassroots community, and those not in the grassroots community, then saying that it's either doesn't go far enough or it goes too far. But short story, the purpose of it was really like, how do we protect and allow the current underground psychedelic community to operate, and how do we protect indigenous and spiritual use around ayahuasca circles and the like? And so so that's where this decriminalization portion came into play. The a couple of things, it allows for an adult over 21 to possess, use, cultivate, process, and share natural psychedelic medicines. These natural psychedelic medicines that are on the decrim personal use side include psilocybin, psilocybin, DMT, mescaline but not from peyote, and ibogaine. And then, I didn't say this earlier, on the first part of this, the state regulated side is just psilocybin, psilocybin for the foreseeable future, but there is an option for the advisory board to add in other natural psychedelic medicines if it makes sense, and if they looked at taking into the right sustainability and cultural considerations in doing that. So let's see. Oh no, there we go. So yeah, here we are. It's like just some timeline, like assuming knock on wood that it passes, things are definitely tightening up a little bit. But we have an advisory board created, by the end of January of this year. There's a year-long process to create rules for facilitator trainings. The whole idea around the facilitator trainings too is to have them like sort of tiered based off of like what sort of services a facilitator is providing, if they're providing trip sitting versus actual psychotherapy services. But then September 2024, we should have the healing center rules finalized, and then and applications open for healing centers. And June 1st, 2026 is they can add in other natural medicines to the state regulated program. And so that Oh, and the other piece of things to know is like, yes, like the decrim personally used provisions do go into effect right away. And this is something for those who are here in Colorado. I'm deeply involved in the campaign, so if you need any yard signs or any materials, do not hesitate to reach out to us. From a polling standpoint, so we're polling ahead, and we have been, but things are definitely tightening up a little bit. Just with how a lot of ballot measures tighten up, when you come sort of close to the end, and it's also been a difficult season federally with not even federally, just like nationwide, with a lot of critiques on just drugs and crime generally, and having the election about a lot of drugs and crime. So with that, I'll turn things over to Yolanda to talk about the 130 measures in Oregon. What is going on?
Yeah, thanks, Josh, and thanks for the rundown on Colorado. Hopefully we'll see 2 states with a regulated psilocybin industry without too much longer here. So Oregon was really the leader in this field. They passed ballot measure 109 in 2020 with 55% of the vote. And built into that ballot measure was basically a 2-year ramp-up period. So over the past 2 years, the Oregon Psilocybin Services, which is the regulatory agency, has been getting itself established, working on rules, figuring out the licensure process, all of which will really kick off in earnest at the end of this year, beginning of next. End of this year, we will have our final regulations for the program, and starting January 2nd, people will be able to apply for service center and manufacturing and facilitator licenses. So similar to Colorado, it's a system where you are going into a service center and administering the psilocybin at the service center under the supervision of a licensed facilitator. And what is currently on the ballot for this election is specific localities. So localities have the opportunity, and this is cities and counties alike, to opt out of the program. And what that means is a service center or manufacturer, which is where the psilocybin would actually be grown and processed into products, would not be permitted in those municipalities or counties. So just to give you a little perspective, there are 130 measures on the ballot for various cities and counties. In total, there are 277 counties and cities in Oregon. So 147 are already, open for business, so to speak, once licensure starts in January. It's just the remaining 130 that are kind of a little bit up in the air as to what that's going to look like. Of that 130, 103 of those will be full bans, whereas 27 are temporary bans or moratoriums. So what that would mean is, you couldn't apply for for instance, service center license on January 2nd, but potentially in 2 years, the moratorium would lapse, and then you could apply in, 2025. They also could refer it back to ban it at a later time or extend the moratorium. So just something to be aware of, but it will also be an opportunity in a couple of years for certain markets that have otherwise not been open to offer some new opportunities at that point in time. Again, this only applies to service centers and manufacturers. That's the really important thing to keep in mind. Facilitator licenses, which are individuals who are licensed to administer, they cannot be banned. And it's also important to note that regardless of the ballot measures this year, all municipalities have the right to institute time, manner, and place restrictions. So that's pretty standard across cannabis, psilocybin, and other industries. So they can say it has to be zoned in this specific area. The operating hours have to be limited in some way, things like that. Really, when you're looking at areas to operate in, the things that you want to look at are how they voted previously. So if you look to the 2020 election results, there are some places like Lake County, Harney County that voted against ballot measure 109 by almost 70%. So in those areas, we're very likely to see them ban these places outright. Others, like the city of Philomath, which I might be mispronouncing, so excuse me if I am, voted for ballot measure 109 with a margin of 17%. So that was a huge margin. That said, the city has some concerns about how the rollout's going to go. So they're taking a more conservative, cautious approach, and they want to see how it shakes out before they sign up their town to take on some of these service centers or manufacturers. So those are the places that, the citizens will have the choice if they want to see them here or not, or if they want to wait. So really, after the election, we're going to have a much clearer list on where places potential licensees can locate, and then we'll be open for business, so to speak, January 2nd.
Awesome, thanks, Yolanda. Yeah. All right, moving onward, state and federal elections to watch. I'm going to turn things back over to Andrew here. What are we watching?
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah.
Thank you, Yolanda. I'm excited to see what will hopefully be a new era of psychedelic ballot measures across the country, legalizing the regulated use of these important natural plant and other substances. So let's first talk about federal House and Senate. So I was reading an article this morning on Marijuana Moment where Chuck Schumer was talking about, trying to work with Republicans and Democrats to line up a safe plus. So, the safe banking plus some expungement, social equity, and others. And, trying to push this during the lame duck session. So that also asks the question is that, will a loss of a unified Congress push Democrats into lame duck action? So are they more likely to pass something if they lose either the House or the Senate? Are they less likely? And how does that change things? And of course, as you guys may know, the lame duck occurs during the period of time after November to the end of the year, when there's a short window in which the legislature, the federal Congress, can pass something knowing that the voters have already spoken, and that they may not feel the political ramifications if those have already occurred. If the Republicans take the House, will Representative Mace and Representative Joyce's cannabis bills move forward? Representative Mace is very junior. She won her second election, and Representative Joyce in Ohio is a bit more senior. And they both have pretty comprehensive cannabis regulatory bills that have been forward. Representative Mace with the States Reform Act. Representative Joyce has a number of different measures and all sorts of different things, and has been a leader on cannabis for a number of years. And we'll see whether or not these move forward. Again, this really depends upon who is in the leadership from Republicans in the House. My personal opinion is I don't think much will happen, despite constructive discussions occurring during lame duck, and hopefully Representative Joyce having somewhat more power in the Republican House. So what happens at the federal level will be important, right? If Democrats somehow continue to hold the House and the Senate, which I polling shows is unlikely, but if it does occur, we'll have another 2 years before the next presidential election, where it's possible that we could see further cannabis reforms. Now, with the last 2 years, we haven't seen anything legislatively go beyond being introduced, and at least in the House, pass with safe banking and the MORE Act. But we'll see. Obviously, the Senate is still complication, even if Democrats hold 50 seats. So now let's say states to watch. So this is single chamber shift for Democratic trifecta. So Minnesota, we've got Democratic governor, Democratic House, and a Republican Senate. As you guys may know, Minnesota was able to pass kind of an edibles for adult use. What happened? This was kind of with a weird quirk in the way that they clarified some things in their hemp laws, which really then opened that up. So is that edible permission for up to 5 milligrams going to stay? Probably. But will we see adult use? That probably will only happen if Democrats are able to take the Senate. And if it does, I think it's likely that Minnesota may pass from the legislature. So Maryland, you've got a Republican governor, Democratic House, Democratic Senate. So of course, the shape of the future adult use law may, and what likely will be impacted by whether or not the Democratic or Republican governor wins in this next election, right? As Yolanda had detailed, Maryland passed a law that, creates a structure for cannabis to be legal and for expungements to occur, but doesn't really delve into any depth at all on how that licensing process will occur. So the balance between existing operators and of social equity applicants will likely to depend upon whether or not Democrats have a true trifecta, whether or not we still have a power sharing dynamic in Maryland. Colorado, as Josh mentioned, this is a state legislative, this is a statutory measure. And so to what tweaks can occur, what sort of implementing language has to be done, that could get complicated if Republicans take the Senate in Colorado. So all of these are really important to watch. I'll be joining another webinar with some individuals that we work with up in Minnesota, Jason Tereszak, about what's happening there. And I think honestly, Minnesota is, and less so Wisconsin, because there's been so much gerrymandering in that state for a while. But really, Minnesota is an important one to watch when it comes to these state legislative races. But also, what happens in a place like Pennsylvania and others. Pennsylvania, they'd have to win both the House and Senate at the state level. But the governor there really does want to legalize. So all of these are important to watch. As we've noted, cannabis reform has been moving for the last 20 plus years, really just at the state level. So this is why when we're looking at whether or not cannabis may pass, just as important to check state legislative races as it is to look at Congress. Thanks, Josh.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. If folks have any questions, now is the time. We've answered some in the Q&A function. The Q&A function on the chat. But if there's other ones, please don't hesitate to put them in there or reach out to us. I think a big piece of this puzzle at the end of the day is is actually getting out there and voting and making sure that people are involved in the process. And you can see, as Andrew alluded to, it's a lot of the actual policies are dictated by those who are the most involved, and generally the most involved folks are those who have some sort of interest in it. But with that said, it doesn't always have to be that way. And everyone can everyone should and can get involved. And for those in Colorado, I'll make a shameless plug again for naturalmedicinecolorado.org. We'll take your donations, we'll take your support. But I think that's the case for all of these measures, for whatever state you're in. With that, let's see, is there any other? Josh or Andrew, I don't know if you want to take on Josh's question. What other states are looking to file legislative for the next 2 to 5 years?
Next 2 to 5 years. So Yolanda and Sal, you can unmute as well if you want to jump in. But I would say we're likely going to see, so for medical cannabis, I think there's a reasonable chance in this next legislative session in North Carolina. That may also depend what happens in the state legislature. So these things are important to watch. Even if there's slight shifts in support, it doesn't have to become democratically controlled. Just maybe some more Republicans that support medical cannabis. South Dakota, where a number of the VS staff were born and raised, and also is important to many of our hearts. Looks a little less likely, but it's been being pushed there in the state Senate for quite a while. And I think has a chance for a very limited medical cannabis program in South Carolina. Other states, we've been talking about this in Kentucky for a while. The current governor, who's a Democrat, is supportive of medical cannabis, and hopefully we'll see something move forward there, but it really depends on the legislature. As I mentioned, Minnesota, I think is prime and close and could have something passed there. 2 to 5 years. We got to look at in New Hampshire, the only state in the far northeast. Well, you said legislatively. I'll talk about Florida in a second. New Hampshire, the Republican governor doesn't really like adult use cannabis, but for those who know a lot about legislative cannabis history, the New Hampshire House was actually the first state legislative chamber to pass adult use legalization many, many years ago. And so, we definitely could see something happen there. It really depends upon what we see in, future elections. I'm not sure whether or not the governor is up. I don't think so in New Hampshire. Now, if we're talking beyond legislative, in ballot initiatives, we've got Florida, which is likely in 2024. Ohio is likely in 2023 or maybe 2024. It will depend upon, some things there. That's actually you want to talk about complicated paths to the ballot. Ohio is one to really look at if you want to nerd out on that one. As I mentioned, Oklahoma is set for this spring of 2023. And other states of ballot initiatives, I imagine Idaho, Nebraska, Wyoming, medical cannabis, they're going to get, hopefully some more funding, some more support to try to get those states medical cannabis legal in 2024. I could probably keep going, but there's only so much I remember off the top of my head.
Awesome. And it looks like we've answered all the main questions. If other folks have questions, please send them over. I will though pose one question for our esteemed panelists as predictions. How do you think we're gonna go, Andrew, and on the cannabis and psychedelic state ballot measures? And if you want to take a guess, on the Oregon ones as well, let's hear it.
Oh, I've been watching those ones as much. So here's what I would say. I want to rank it in high confidence and moderate confidence. I have very high confidence adult use legalization is going to pass in Maryland. Polling is really pretty strong there. And the state generally is, Democratic stronghold. Polling has shown back and forth more support. I mean, South Dakota passed in 2020, granted that was a ballot initiative in a presidential year, and is struggling a little bit more in this year. So if we look at Arkansas, we look at North Dakota, where there isn't really much polling at all. But South Dakota and Missouri, it's been back and forth. I probably am a little bit more inclined to say that Missouri will pass than Arkansas. But those I only all have, moderate confidence that they will pass. It's challenging to pass a ballot measure. We've worked on many of these in the past. It's a lot of work. It's, even more challenging to pass it during a non-presidential year. And it's also challenging to pass it when, funding is not as prevalent as it was in previous years, when we had, honestly, progressive and somewhat, libertarian billionaires providing a lot of the funding to get this done. And now it's being relied on some of the existing operators. Just to, show you, so there's a survey in South Dakota University that were released, middle of October, showed that only 45% in favor, 47% against, and 8 undecided. So, if you got any friends in Missouri or South Dakota, North Dakota, or Arkansas, Maryland, give them a call, make sure they're voting. And each of these campaigns have different ways that you can assist. So really to keep cannabis moving across the country, keep the momentum occurring, we got to make sure that we don't have significant setbacks. But those are my predictions. Anyone else? Josh?
Yolanda, Sally, what are your predictions over there?
Yeah, I think Andrew really hit it. I think Maryland is definitely the one most likely to pass, but it's not over until it's over. And there have been, numerous elections that, polling was going one way, so people don't show up and things don't pass or people don't get elected. So go vote, make sure your voice is heard if you care about these issues, and just get out there, and hopefully we'll see at least one, if not 3 or 4 pass, and some new psychedelics in Colorado here.
My vote, of course, Maryland, but of course, I think Arkansas is going to pass. I think the South is hungry for reasonable drug laws. And I've recently been in Mississippi, and there was a lot of talk about Arkansas and how they're going to be the first one in the South to do it. I think Mississippi's going to try to do it in a couple of years too. I'm pretty sure they will. So, but there's a lot of talk about how Arkansas is going to be the first. So I think there's some competition there, that healthy competition that hopefully will push at least one of them into the reasonable drug law category.
Appreciate that. And Sally, do you want to take this Texas question? Is there any predictions around Texas in the next 5 years?
Well, we have been doing some work down in Texas, and it's definitely it's an interesting place. I think certainly in the next 5 years, we should see an expansion of their medical program, if nothing else. Hopefully it's going to be more like within the next year, not the next 5 years for that. But a lot of this, again, it's dependent on who's in charge. A lot of the main officials in Texas are not in favor of this. So, you got to pay attention to your local elections and vote in people who are going to pass these measures. So we'll see what happens, but we are very hopeful to see medical expansion, certainly within the next year.
Yeah, but as many saw too, Sean Hauser responded in the chat. She, runs our Texas contingent and knows all things Texas. So don't hesitate to hit her up for both opportunities in Texas this cycle and in the future.
Yeah, the last thing I would say about Texas is that they only meet every other year, which extends the timeline for legislative movement. Because if they don't pass it 1 year, they got to wait 2 more years until they come back in session.
Well, awesome. I'm going to make the bold prediction that all the cannabis and the psychedelic measures are going to pass, except for the county ones in Oregon, which I think will bat like 50-50. We'll see though. I'm hopeful. With that, I again want to, thank Andrew and Sally and Yolanda for joining us on this panel, for Jen for helping to put this on, for everyone who participated and asked questions. Thank you. The two big things. One, is we're here. We've helped tons of businesses and individuals and campaigns and communities and probably almost every state in the US and frankly North America at that point. So if you have questions, you want to get involved, don't hesitate to reach out to us. And number two, we should be having a post-election webinar on the 10th to sort of unpack everything that just happened, and we can see if our crystal balls were calibrated right or wrong, and what this actually looks like. So with that, if any of the other panelists want to chime in, say something, now's the time. But again, thank you all. Vote yes in Prop 122, and we'll go from there.